Hello and welcome to another edition of Bangladesh Today. We have with us Praveen Swami of the Hindu newspaper, who writes on international strategic and security related issues. Before we discuss developments in Bangladesh, here's a short report on the recent mob attacks on Buddhist and Hindu temples in the southeast region of the country.
Last week, a mob torched 11 Buddhist temples, damaged 2 others, and ransacked at least 30 homes of Buddhists at southeastern Ramu town of Cox's Bazar. The attacks began after a photo of a burned copy of the Holy Book was posted on Facebook. The rioters blamed the photo on a 25-year-old local Buddhist, though it was not immediately clear if he actually posted the photo. Some local villagers also blamed minority Rohingya Muslims for the flare-up. It is suspected that protesters apparently were also prompted by the violence over the cross-border Rakhine state in Buddhist-majority Myanmar that recently witnessed a sectarian violence against Muslims. Hundreds of Buddhists fled their southern Bangladesh villages in the wake of attacks by Muslims. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's government is blaming Islamic radicals and opposition activists for attacks on minority Buddhists and their temples in southern Bangladesh. Home Minister Moinuddin Alamgir said activists of opposition parties were also among the attackers. Alamgir accused local opposition Bangladesh nationalist lawmaker Lutfur Rahman Kadral of instigating the attack, a charge denied by the opposition legislator. Army soldiers, paramilitary border guards and police were deployed, and the government has banned all public gatherings in the troubled areas near the southern border with Myanmar. In another development, main opposition BNP leader Khaleda Zia, in a statement, accused the government administration of failing to protect the minority Buddhists. Buddhists make up less than 1% of Muslim-majority Bangladesh, but followers of the two religions usually coexist peacefully, and the recent attacks are one of the worst attacks against minorities.
Praveen, the recent riots that's happened in Bangladesh. Now tell me, the police chief says that it was an organized riot that happened. It wasn't a reaction to just the Facebook picture. It wasn't just a reaction to the anti-Islamic film. Now, if it was an organized riot, why and how did it happen?
Well, we don't specifically know yet who organized this violence, but the claim isn't itself surprising. Bangladesh has had a history of communal violence for the last many years, and particularly since you've had a government committed to secular values, try and restore some democratic and secular order in the country. Over the last few months, as you'll have noticed, war crimes trials against Islamists who were involved in atrocities have mounted. This government's come down very, very hard on Islamists and jihadi groups. The religious right wing has been trying to mobilize against that, and communalism has of course been a handy tool for this to happen. You've had attacks on the Hindu minority, but also on secularism, secularist targets, and with what seems to have happened is that with this Prophet Muhammad film, it provided a pretext or an excuse to escalate all this, leading to this tragic violence.
Is there an involvement of the Rohingyas in this? Could there be?
Potentially, yes. The Rohingya minority in Bangladesh has got things on its mind other than fighting with Hindus or with the government. But there are certainly organized political parties who've picked this up as a grievance. The government of Bangladesh's stand has very much been that this is a problem that Burma needs to deal with. And it closed its border to refugee flows. It's got terrible problems of its own with poverty. It doesn't need a large-scale refugee flow into Bangladesh. But it's possible in that region some number of Rohingya were involved. We just don't know enough. But certainly there's been political backing for this, and like I said, Islamists have found a pretext or an excuse to whip up passions. I doubt this is going to be the last of it.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you. Is it going to spread? Is there fear that this could spread? I mean, right now it's just restricted to the Cox's Bazar area. Could it spread further into into the interiors. It could go further in.
Potentially, yes. I mean, the good news is you have a government which is committed to maintaining order.
But is that good enough? I mean, is the intention good enough? Do you think Sheikh Hasina, and does she have the support of the army, the security forces, to curb this element right now?
I think the Bangladesh army, the Bangladeshi security forces, like so many institutions in that country, are quite deeply divided on ideological lines. If we look at this a little historically, remember that even in 1971, during the Great War of Independence, there were plenty of people within Bangladesh who supported Pakistan, and the Jamaat-e-Islami, which continues to have a significant presence in Bangladesh, actually collaborated with the Pakistan army in the large-scale killings of Bangladeshi Muslims, let alone Bangladeshi Hindus. This tendency, this Islamist tendency in Bangladeshi politics has long been there. Now, it's a minority tendency, that there's no doubt about, but it's a powerful and increasingly vocal one. In areas like Cox's Bazar, for many years now, Bangladeshis and various foreign journalists have been noting deep cultural changes. For example, the rise of a hijabi culture in that area, and even in rural areas, promoted by, sadly, charities based in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, and also by Salafist preachers and so on in Bangladesh. I think this government has made a great deal of difference, though. I mean, for the first time in many, many years, you've had a fight back against these forces. You've had political mobilization against these forces. And in that sense, I think we can be optimistic that at least this effort to generalize this violence, to push it out, is not going to go uncombated. This government understands that its survival is enmeshed with the future of secularism in Bangladesh. Its political prospects are linked with that, and it will do the utmost. Now, how much that utmost is?
Yeah, she'll be able to contain it, to this area.
I doubt that it's going to. You may have some violence elsewhere in the country that's happened in the past, but I don't think we're going to see a generalized outbreak. What I do think is worrying is that things are coming, as it were, to a head, especially with these war crimes trials where the Jamaat-e-Islami is seeing many of its senior leaders now being locked up, prosecuted for their horrible crimes in 1971 and earlier.
And that has to end by 2014.
That has to end by 2014, and there will be an ongoing appeals process and so on after that. But many of the crimes of the Islamist right are coming to the fore right now, being revived in the memory of a younger generation which didn't even know about these things and had forgotten these things. And the Islamists realize that if they have to hang on to any shred of legitimacy in that society, they have to find issues to fight on. And whipping up passions against the religious minorities is a very easy way of doing it.
So you think that the Jamaat is going to find, these short-term causes and then
the Jamaat, and sadly people in the legitimate democratic opposition in Bangladesh who find, tragically find this a convenient sort of thing to try and undermine the government with. This is politics as usual in South Asia. None of our political parties anywhere in this region have any great sense of principle. But as you've seen, there's been a great deal of opposition, mobilization and so on and so forth. And in this climate of uncertainty, of great mobilization, it becomes quite easy for extremist groups to then also whip up trouble along these lines.
I'm going to come back to what I was talking about, Sheikh Hasina's control over the army in this. Just about a couple of months back, there was this coup attempt. Now, if the radical elements, the Islamic radicals, are able to again mount a similar kind of an operation, the generals, the army, the 16 or 17 of them, they wanted to bring about an Islamic regime. Now, if they again gang up, now you have the simmering anger right now. She has the war crimes thing going on against her. The radicals are getting together again. Could a similar attempt take place again? And if so, how vulnerable is she right now, and how much can she again, curb this if it happens again?
An attempt to mount some kind of coup is certainly a strong possibility. The army was very, very comfortable with the situation prior to the rise of Sheikh Hasina's government, where you had this government of notables or impartial, technocrats and so on, which was a very nice label for de facto military rule. The military always enjoys great deals of influence in these situations. There's been elements in the Pakistan army, in the Bangladesh army, who have always looked with a certain envy to their counterparts in Pakistan. Who've had a decisive say in government, and the Bangladesh army has always sought a presence disproportionate. It certainly hasn't wanted to go, certainly hasn't been entirely comfortable with the civilianization of the country and the rise of a genuine, durable democratic order. Of course, there was a great coup there after their thing. We must remember that their founding father, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, was after all assassinated by the military and so on. I think Bangladesh has changed since those years.
The fear is that it's going to slide. There's always
I
that
think the
fear
success
with
story.
Bangladesh.
I think the success story is kind of the problem. The success story, as with every changing country, and we've seen this in India, new wealth is distributed unequally. You've had a great deal of tension to do with industrial unrest, with textile workers, and these things are quite predictable parts of a country where hard-nosed economic change is coming about. Certainly in India, we've been through our phases of this. Bangladesh is now entering this quite dramatic period of change. It's doing very well, but it's facing all these challenges. There are a couple of reasons why I think the army is on a slightly weak wicket right now. Firstly, the 70s or the 80s, where the world really didn't care what happened in Bangladesh, are gone. And a military coup would be looked on with a great deal of international condemnation, and would certainly invite certain international consequences for the Bangladesh army.
Who cares? I mean, once the coup
I think
is
I think all armies care about these things, especially in countries like Bangladesh, where the economy is deeply, or like Pakistan, where the country is quite deeply knitted with
But now,
international aid
one
and
talks about
patronage.
soft coups and stuff like that. Those also happen, isn't it?
Those do happen, and the army, as I said, will try and push.
Yeah.
It certainly made a big noise about Sheikh Hasina's inability to control India's border security force on the border. It's at the leading edge of these constant complaints about Bangladeshi border crossers getting killed. And there's been whining, but I don't think anyone sane, any sane general, which is not to say there are no insane generals, but any sane general will contemplate a coup simply because sanctions and certain consequences will follow inexorably. What might happen is a situation where the military allows things to degenerate in a way that in the next elections things become bad for the Prime Minister and the ruling party. And that sort of gently pushes that process along.
Does Khalida Zia realize that this is something that could happen, where if she collaborates with these elements, it could result in the military coming and not just a democratic process coming about where she becomes the next Prime Minister, but actually a military coup and she's out of the scene altogether?
Let me answer that in two parts, if I may, Smita. And the first is, I don't think Khalida Zia is a person with no sense of responsibility. From an Indian context, let's remember, for example, that some of the early crackdown on jihadi terrorism in Bangladesh began during her time. Some of the dismantling of the Lashkar-e-Taiba's infrastructure. Now, this was admittedly done under a great deal of international pressure, particularly American and British pressure. Her cooperation with India was not great, but she proved receptive to pressure when it was mounted, which shows that at least she understands the way the world works. Let's also remember, though, that she was perfectly happy to allow the army to provoke a crisis or attempt to provoke a crisis with India. The killings of border security force personnel are a case in point at that point. I would like to imagine that somebody like Khalida Zia, who by no stretch of imagination is a foolish or irresponsible person, would have the sense to understand that Bangladesh's best interests lie in the deepening of its democracy, in the institutionalization of this very hard-won democratic process. Unfortunately, in South Asia, all over this region, and we've
pick either Pakistan or India.
Anyway, we've learned not to underestimate the foolishness of our politicians.
Why does that happen with Bangladesh? Tell me. I mean, why is it that we tell them or we tell our neighbors pick either Pakistan or India to be friends with, to be partners with? Why do we tell each of our neighbors that? It's very simplistic, but that's what it actually comes down to, isn't it?
I'm not sure we do actually do that. And look, the sad truth about Pakistan today is that nobody in their right mind would pick it to be a partner with. Okay. This is a semi-bankrupt country that is perched on the edge of anarchy. And one wishes them well. I mean, for the sake of this region, one really does wish them well. I think any sane person will hope that they will somehow pull themselves off the edge of the abyss and not jump. But nothing that's happened in the last few years inspires a great deal of confidence on that count.
Is there linkages between the terror groups in Bangladesh and Pakistan? Of course, a lot has been written about these linkages, but how strong are these linkages, and is it on real-time basis?
In terror groups in South Asia, generally the level of organization is not very, very high. Like everything else we do, things are a little muddy and disorganized, and that's true of terrorists as much as anyone else. The Harkatul Jihad Islami Bangladesh, which is the largest of the terrorist groups in Bangladesh and closely enmeshed with its political system, with the JMB and with other Islamist groups there, came up in the course of the Afghan Jihad. As with so many countries around what is called the Islamic world, many young people went to fight in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. And when they came back to their country, they set up various jihadi movements over there. The Harkat Jihad Islami Bangladesh, though, even though it has this sort of overall ideological link with the Harkatul Jihad in Bangladesh and through it to Al-Qaeda, certainly doesn't depend on it for day-to-day kinds of things. It doesn't need to. I mean, what do you need to set off a bunch of bomb explosions? You need a sack of fertilizer, a few batteries and some diesel. You know, this is not something for which you need a lot of patronage. What Islamist groups have been trying to do, though, as in Pakistan, is build up a network of patronage. So in many of the poorest and most deprived areas, for example, they've set up madrasas, religious schools, which allow them to build a recruiting base and to influence the minds of young people over a generation. There are a great many charities which are very active in areas where the government or the state isn't, which again gives these groups some legitimacy.
Now these Harkat, when Indians talk about Bangladeshi terrorism and how it is impacting upon India, it's like this pincer-like effect on India. Now, how does it work? How do we deal with this in India?
Well, the simple truth is there's not, short of, the Bangladeshis in recent months and years have been extremely cooperative with Indian security agencies in the investigation into the bombing of the Delhi High Court. Where
we keep hearing this because the security experts keep telling us it's, there's extreme levels, high levels of cooperation and all that. But every time an incident happens, you get to hear about how there are Bangladesh, and then common people turn around saying, "What is this cooperation that's happening?"
Well, let's look at the concrete case. I mean, here's just the concrete example I was talking about was the Delhi High Court bombing. Bangladesh's security services allowed the National Investigations Agency to go and question a number of suspects on Bangladeshi soil who were Bangladeshi nationals. They ensured that the key suspect, who was an Indian national from Jammu and Kashmir, was in India, where he now faces a criminal proceeding here. Contrast this with the support we've got from just about anyone else in the world, and it's extremely favorable. I mean, India had to struggle extremely hard diplomatically, for example, even to get to question David Coleman Headley in the Bombay case. On a quieter level, though Bangladesh isn't always keen to publicize these things, on a number of other terror cases where suspects have gone across and so on and so forth, their security services have quietly cooperated with making sure that people are picked up on the other end. There have been two Lashkar-e-Taiba operatives who had set up Lashkar-e-Taiba front businesses and training operations, who've been arrested there. The Pakistanis tried extremely hard to have them released. Bangladesh resisted that pressure in both cases, and both those individuals are still in jail.
And then these northeast rebels
have been cracked down on. Now, let's remember two things which are reality. The first is we can build the biggest fence in the world and we can make it 100 feet high and 1,000 feet wide or whatever. But the Bangladesh-India border is riverine,
which
it's marshy.
We can't. Let's put that at rest. There's no
people
way we
will come and go. Now, what has happened typically in terror cases is that somebody commits a bombing in Uttar Pradesh or in Delhi somewhere, catches a train to Calcutta and pays somebody 200 rupees or 500 rupees to cross into Bangladesh. It's the easiest and cheapest thing to do, and that is not going to stop. With the best will in the world, that is not going to stop. Similarly, there have been a large number of cases of people going illegally to Bangladesh, being given Pakistani passports or fake Bangladeshi passports to fly to Bangkok or to fly elsewhere and then go to Pakistan for training and then come back into India the same way. If you look through charge sheets in various terrorism cases, you will find this is a recurrent pattern. But frankly, getting a fake passport in Dhaka, I am sure, is just as easy as getting a fake passport in India. After all, we have ad nauseum terror cases here where people have got fake passports and done all kinds of things.
It's so terrifying when somebody says this, that there's no way that we are going to be able to stop anybody from crossing borders.
No.
There's no way we are going to be able to stop fake passports. There's no way we're going to be able to stop.
But here is what we can do, and to which a beginning's been made. I mean, look, all the sealing of the border is fine. If you look at the United States...
Well, no, it's not fine. It's not happening, you're saying.
It's not going to happen either. The United States spends billions of dollars on protecting its southern states from the influx of illegal immigrants from Mexico.
So what can we do? We can only hope Bangladesh becomes rich enough and doesn't want to come in.
Which is starting to happen. I mean, illegal immigration has declined sharply. But here's what can be done on the terrorism front, and is being done, which is, so far people have enjoyed impunity. You set off a bomb here, you go over there, you know the Bangladeshis are not going to touch you. Today that's not true. The Bangladeshis will come down on you very, very hard if they find out what you're up to. But the second thing is even more important, which is why these riots are important. As long as there is a swamp, the breeding of mosquitoes is not a big surprise. Terrorists will come out of a climate in which fundamentalism, jihadism are encouraged. And at last we have a government in Bangladesh which over the last few years has been committed, given all its political constraints, to fighting or to trying to drain that swamp. And this is something I think not just India, but Bangladesh's international partners all over are very, very grateful for, because quite frankly, if you'd asked me 5 years ago or 10 years ago, do you think we will ever have a government in Bangladesh that is going to take these people on? I'd have said, no, you're joking.
And it is now.
Right? It's a beginning. Okay. How far it will go, I don't know. I'm not a fortune teller, I'm not a Jyotishi.
But
certainly there are challenges, but there's a beginning. And I think we should give credit for that.
Thank you very much for speaking to us, Praveen.
Thank you, Smita.